Hello everyone, what's up? This Star Wars hobby tutorial is the third in a series of 3 videos dedicated to my crashed X-Wing build, which is a piece of Star Wars Legion terrain. Each of the videos documents the process leading up to a particular painting or weathering technique. Tonight's video is all about applying snow effects to your models, and more specifically about how to create a snow diorama inspired by the Battle of Hoth. So this is more or less where we left it in part 2. If you look closely, you'll see that by this stage I had also painted the rocks that came with the base. For the snow, I chose AK Terrain Snow, which I have used several times before and always to good effect. I started applying it with a large flat brush, but I had some difficulties with it. Switching to a spatula was just a stupid idea, as I didn't have enough room to maneuver. The finish was as good as always, but I wondered why I was having difficulties applying it this time. Then it dawned on me. I had opened this a year ago and it was clearly drier than normal. I did in fact have another tub brand new, but I really didn't want to waste anything. So what I did was dampen my brush slightly and I continued undeterred. For harder to reach spots, I switched to a smaller round brush from time to time. I still had to cajole the snow more than normal, but the effect was as good as ever. Later on, the spatula did come in handy for some parts, saving me a lot of time in the process. For things like that R2 droid, I had to be careful not to get any snow on the figure. But again, that spongy texture makes that a lot easier. By the way, if you recognize this particular R2 droid, let me know in the comments. Let's see just how good your command of Star Wars lore is, shall we? I should mention that this AK Terrain Snow, same as all the products from the Terrains line, is a water-based acrylic product. It begins to harden in about 30 minutes, and it cures completely in 24 hours, after which it will provide you with a rock-hard finish. So that was the first layer of snow done. It's better to apply the product in a couple of layers and let it dry in between them. The second layer took quite a while, but I wanted to make sure that I got the finish just how I wanted. So I just relaxed, I listened to the Empire Strikes Back soundtrack, and I went over every inch in a methodical fashion. As I went, I could clearly see the transformation that was unfolding before my eyes. That's a really good feeling, isn't it? The next step was to improve our texture even further by applying AK's Snow Microballoons. This product replicates powder snow very well. To apply it, I simply sprinkle it on top of the base using a spatula, as you can see. The main idea was to increase realism and to provide different textures and more visual interest, representing different types of snow or ice. It's important to note that I repeated this step a second time, so all in all, there were 2 rounds of snow and 2 rounds of microballoons, so to speak. Now it was time to take care of what I wanted to be a canopy covered in ice. For that I chose Ice Sparkles, also from AK Interactive. This product consists of a super fine white sand of sorts, which is so fine indeed that it's not really easy to handle. Also, please be very careful not to breathe that in. I then added some AK still water and made sure to mix both products really well until I achieved a thick, gel-like consistency. I applied the mix with a round brush, which was easy due to the glossy finish that I had achieved previously on the canopy. However, the fact that the canopy is at an angle made this a little bit tricky, as I could see my mix running down and pooling on the lower side a bit more than I would have wanted. If I speed up the footage here, I think you can clearly see what I mean. After a few minutes, I applied a second layer of my ice mix, which worked well to even out imperfections. I then let this dry for 30 minutes at a time in 2 different positions to make sure that the product spread over the entire canopy. This is the result the following morning, with the product completely cured and hardened. Living in northern Germany as I do, I'm no stranger to scraping ice off my car's windshield in the mornings, trust me. And I was really happy with these results, particularly given that it was my first time trying a finish like this. Next, it was time for light color black umber, which you saw me apply in my previous episode. As you can see, I started applying shading to the area of snow closest to the X-wing. However, I started changing my mind about the color as I went, as I realized that it would be better to introduce a different color to the one that I had used for post-shading and streaking on the fuselage. Therefore, I grabbed my ammo black shader, reduced the pressure to around 15 psi, as this is not quite as forgiving as the light color liquid pigments, and I gave that another try. I immediately liked it better, so I'm very relieved that I altered course, so to speak. I went methodically all around the X-wing, trying to make my shading noticeable, but still transparent. This I thought was the most important part. Something which could make or break everything. The striations on the surface, created by the X-wing, dragging along the surface of the snow. I wanted to use the lines as a guide, while also keeping the effect diffuse. After that, I decided to introduce a brown tone, following the advice of my friend Rick, whose feedback on this whole step was crucial for me. The idea was to create more tonal variation by adding a subtle transition on the areas of shading farthest from the ship itself. I went all around every piece of the X-wing and also the smaller parts, using the same principle. My idea was to convey the area around the wreckage being dirty rather than an explosion. With this in mind, I then resorted to a mix which I used to really good effect on my Grim FT-17 diorama exactly a year ago now, namely snow sprinkles, microballoons, and still water in roughly equal parts. Like before, I didn't really use any exact measurements, don't get me wrong, I merely eyeballed my mixes. I applied this with a brush all around the areas which I had shaded before. What for, you ask? Well, while I did not want to portray an explosion, like I said, I did imagine that the residual heat from the wreckage would have melted the snow closest to it. However, this is Hoth we're talking about, right? Therefore, that molten snow would have frozen again pretty quickly. That is precisely what I tried to convey with this. By the way, in these shots you can see everything much better, thanks to me having removed the white paper that I always use as a background while recording. I'm sorry I didn't think of this earlier, guys, force of habit. For more sensitive areas, like around the R2 droid, I switched to a smaller round brush in order to have better control. In any case, this product is also like a really thick gel, so it's not that hard to control it. At this point, I realized that I had forgotten about the rocks. Silly me. I grabbed my trusty snow sprinkles again and decided to apply it in an irregular fashion, concentrating on horizontal surfaces where snow would naturally accumulate. Then I sprinkled microballoons on top before the paste could dry. Again, I knew this combination from my FT-17 diorama, and I was confident that it would look pretty good, while adding yet another different snow or ice texture to the base as a whole. Lastly, I took my still water again and added a little bit of fluorescent green pigment, giving it a really good mix. When I was satisfied with the consistency, I added a drop of ammo grime shader and mixed my concoction again. What the hell was that for, you ask? Well, I had two reasons. First, I really wanted to add a splash of color to an otherwise rather drab diorama. And secondly, I wanted to try an effect which I had been meaning to create for a while. A coolant leak. After poring over several cutaway diagrams of X-Wings and other starfighters from the Star Wars universe, I really couldn't find exactly where the coolant lines might be on this particular craft. But I had a pretty good idea, and I could extrapolate from those diagrams. Anyways, as you can see, this mix was pretty easy to apply. In order to represent the coolant beginning to freeze, again it's Hoth, guys, I sprinkled some ice sparkles on top. A few minutes later, I decided to mix the remainder of my green goo with some more ice sparkles, and then apply a second layer. This worked really well, and I was happy that I had made yet another change on the fly. In fact, I think that's kind of the running theme in this project and the moral of the story. I did have a step-by-step plan before I started, but at the same time, I also had moments of doubt and moments of inspiration, and both led me to deviate from my pre-established plan. Every time that I did, things actually improved, and so did my own enjoyment of the process. So for those of us who are planners by nature, and perhaps just a little bit OCD as well, I think it can be quite good, actually liberating, to enjoy some flexibility. In other words, don't be afraid to improvise, guys. And speaking of deviations, this has become a much longer video than I originally anticipated. But if you have stuck with me all the way, I hope that you have enjoyed it. Before I let you go, I would like to thank all of my YouTube members. Your continued support is what really keeps me making content, despite many other demands on my time. I'll be back soon, but in the meantime, don't forget, keep it up and weather it out.